Welcome, everybody, to the Article 20 Network's first panel, Organizing Your First Protest. My name is Dan Imar Blair, Executive Director of the Article 20 Network. And we are going to be discussing the ins and outs of organizing your first protest this evening. The Article 20 Network, just so you know a little bit about who we are, we're a human rights organization, the only human rights organization devoted strictly to the freedom of assembly. We defend and promote the freedom of assembly in the United States and around the world. And we take our name from Article 20 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which reads, everyone has the right to the freedom of assembly. And that's our main work. But what very fundamental to our work is not just defending the human right, but promoting it and promoting its exercise. It's very important to us that we believe that a proliferation of freedom of peaceful assemblies is vital to democracy and society. And that's why we're here tonight talking about helping folks find their legs and organize their first protest. So tonight we are joined by my colleague Venus from the Article 20 Network, the chair of our board. We're also joined tonight by Eileen Flanagan from Earthquaker Action Team, Zoe Heath from Sussex County Pride, Royal Parker, Until We're All Free, and Roya Salehi from Grannies Respond. And so I just want to first start off just by saying thank you to everybody for being here tonight. Looking forward to a very productive conversation that I hope helps a lot of folks out there. We are hosting this event as a follow-on to a guide that we just released, the Article 20 Network. It's called the Article 20 Network Guide to Organizing Your First Protests. Perhaps we could pull it up just so folks can see what it looks like. You can find this guide, a 4-page guide on our website. And it covers all of the basics of, why would you protest? It has 10 fundamentals about things that you really shouldn't miss when you're planning your protests. And then we also took a look at some of the characteristics of very successful protests, and included some of those ideas as well. The guide is available on our website, and the link is available in the chat. So the way that we're going to continue the evening, so we're going to begin with a few questions that we've planned and prepared for the panelists here at the Article 20 Network. And then we're going to open it up for questions from our guests, from all of you attendees. Thank you very much for joining tonight. And we will have hopefully a good full 90 minutes of discussion about what it means to organize your first protest. So just before we get started, I just want to make everybody aware that we offer our guide and we offer our public content and our panels for free to the public. We believe that the information that we're sharing belongs to the public, and therefore we don't put any restrictions on access to it. However, it does cost money to create these things. So if after tonight's panel you feel fulfilled, please drop by our website, which will also be in the chat, and you can leave us a donation if you could. Thank you. And then you can also find us at our website, a20n.org, as well as Facebook as Article 20 Network, Instagram as Article 20 Network, and Twitter as Article 20 Net. So we're going to start off first. Let's hear from our panelists. So I just want to start off, folks, if everybody could first start off just by introducing yourself, your pronouns, a little history of your organizing experience. And then I'd like to hear from you, what does it mean to you to protest? What does protesting mean to you? And I think maybe we'll start off with Royal, because they're to my right.
Hey, my name is Royal. I go by he, him, his pronouns. I'm so thankful to be here. Thank you for having me, Dan, Article 20 Network. Protesting, what was it like? You said, what was the question again?
What does it mean to you?
Oh, what does it mean to me? Okay, protesting means to me, means a lot to me. I started protesting when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and I saw myself in Trayvon Martin. And many of you might know Trayvon Martin was murdered in Florida by George Zimmerman, and there was no accountability. When I watched the trial, that's what kind of sparked my interest. Very adamantly and very passionately wanting to get out there. So that's what started it for me. Thank you.
Eileen?
Yeah, thank you. Eileen Flanagan, I use she, her pronouns. I've been protesting in various ways since the 1980s. I really started under the Reagan administration and have worked on a wide range of issues. But I think when I started, I thought of protest as a way of showing that I disagreed with bad things that were happening without really believing that my showing up could make a difference. It was more like, this is bad, this policy is bad, this war is bad, this police violence is bad, Um, but I think in the last 10 years, I've really come to believe deeply that what we do matters. And I feel like there's a collective kind of waking up to that that's been happening. And so now I would say that protest is my way of making change with other people, positive change, stopping the bad things, but also creating the world that we want to live in.
Roya?
Hi, my name is Roya Silahi, and my pronouns are she, he, her, and hers. I grew up in Iran and witnessed my first successful protest done by others actually during the Iranian Revolution when I was just 13. And that made me it really made a strong impression on me as a teenager. And after I came to the United States, I participated in protests organized by others, but did not do any organizing of my own. It wasn't until I was 52 when I supported the organization of the movement in response to the separation of children from their parents at the southern border, called Granny's Respond. And we organized a week-long trip from New York City to the border, which began with the 3 cars. We ended up with hundreds of cars as we got closer to the border. We organized the events, including protests in cities along the route. To me, protesting means using my body and my voice to stand up against injustice. It really means taking action, and speaking up when something that I deeply and passionately care about and I felt like it has gone wrong.
Zoe?
Hello, everyone. My name is Zoe Heath. My pronouns are she, her, hers. To give a brief history of my organizing and protest experience, I started on a very, very local level and organized my first protest as a walkout at my local high school over some hiring changes. And that quickly devolved into me going to all of my school board meetings and just being that person at my high school. But for me personally, protesting is exactly what all the other panelists said. It is a way for us to use our minds, our bodies, to not only powerfully voice dissent, but to powerfully enact change.
Thank you. And I want to also introduce my colleague, Venus.
Hi, yes, I'm Venus, she, her, hers, and I just want to echo the warm welcome to our panelists and everyone who's here with us. Dan mentioned that I'm the chair of the Article 20 Network board, and I'm just going to be helping to facilitate our conversation tonight. And my organizing experience is very blended with what I do for a living. I really care about the rights to equity and access, particularly for populations that I'm passionate about. So children, women, people of color, people with disabilities. And over the years, my approach and beliefs around organizing have really centered around bringing the voices of those populations into the work, making sure that they are heard, and very instrumental in building coalition, community building, and that kind of thing. So thanks, Dan, and excited to get started talking with everyone.
So let's jump in. Here we go. So question for everybody, and we'll go in the opposite direction here, starting with Zoe, if that's okay. We often talk about someone finding their voice, right? And what kind of a leap were you taking when you organized your first protest? What did it mean for your personal growth to organize your first protest? Zoe?
Thank you. So, like I mentioned before, the first time I organized anything on my own was when I was a junior in high school, and 500 students at my high school walked out to protest some hiring changes in our administration. And I had been to protests before. After the 2016 election, I bought a bus ticket to Washington, and I was just like, I'm going to be there for the Women's March. And I had taken part in actions like that. But later that year in 2017, when it appeared that there was a little bit of a quid pro quo happening within our administration, a lot of students felt moved to do something, not just because what was happening was wrong, but because someone was being wrong. The right person for the job was being passed over because of personal issues and things that were wrong. So for me personally, it became a huge identifier for me as a person. Like, people always identified me as, oh, that is the girl who does protests. That is the one who starts trouble, if you will. And it really helped me personally hone in on what else was going wrong in my area. Because I organized this protest, I started going to my local school board meetings, and I learned that our superintendent was being sued for sexual harassment and was costing our district money, and like it was harming students' well-being and like the teachers' well-being. So that single action was able to open up a much more wider lens and has led me to continue to make action today. So taking that single leap to organize what was supposed to be a single event led to what defined the rest of my high school career and what I did after high school.
Fascinating. Thank you. Roya?
I certainly can relate to Zoe's experience, and I absolutely haven't done as many organizing as Zoe has done. But I learned and grew so much from my own experience. In the beginning, I was quite apprehensive, and actually took me a minute to commit to it. For me, it was all about realizing my own power and being willing to be vulnerable. And you might have heard that quote, our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are actually powerful beyond measure. And so I had a similar experience of asking myself, like, who am I to think that I could do this? Like, and my actions would actually even inspire others to join. So it wasn't until I actually had to turn the question around and say, why not me? That propelled me to dive in. But it took time, and it was a journey. The whole experience changed me, but for sure, because I'm generally very shy, reserved, but I had to be open and vulnerable and putting myself out there to talk about what I cared about the most, and and do things that I've never done before, such as speaking with the press or being in front of a large audience. It was very scary, but I learned that I had it in me, and I learned so much about my own capabilities as a result of this experience.
That reminds me of Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, which has a lot to learn about finding your voice as well. Eileen?
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of that. Even though I participated in activism for a long, long time, it really wasn't until I was also in my early 50s when I started taking on real leadership. So when I thought about this question, the protest that felt like my finding my voice moment was working with Earthquaker Action Team. I was the new chair of the board, and we decided to organize what was then the largest bank branch action in US history. So instead of having one big protest, we had 17 protests on the same day in different locations. we were pushing PNC Bank to stop investing in companies that do mountaintop removal coal mining, which is a horrible practice of blowing up mountains to get coal. It's terrible for climate change. It's terrible for people in Appalachia who live nearby. And um, when we had decided to go after the financing of it, and so there were all these bank branches that were ripe for visitation. And so we organized these teams of people to go inside PNC Bank branches. Many of them had silent prayer time because our group was founded by Quakers. And then the last action of the day was a civil disobedience action. And that was the beginning of this journey, or part of this journey with Earth Quaker Action Team, of really feeling the difference between protest that's just about voicing dissent and building power, as I think it was Zoe who said, that can actually push a $4 billion a year corporation, which we did. We won with no staff, no office. We pushed a $4 billion a year bank. And so that did absolutely change my life in all kinds of ways. As Roya was saying, just confidence to do new things. When Trump was elected, I started offering online classes, sharing the strategy lessons I had learned doing this work. And that was something that, aside from not having the skills, I wouldn't have had the confidence, I think, to do that if it hadn't been for those kinds of experiences.
And Royal, the question still is, what did your first protest mean to you personally? What did it mean for you?
Yeah, Royal, he, him, his. Wow, I've been to so many protests, and I've been dragged to so many protests, right? When I was a kid, right? But I would have to say the most meaningful, like when I found my voice, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it, right? My mom and I, we went down to Washington, D.C., and we were just down there, and like we were loud, we were proud, and everybody else was kind of quiet because we had got there early. And I was fired up because, like I said, and I always say, I look on the TV or I read in the news, and it's somebody that looks like me. And the trauma is real. It's scary. I'm 6'3", 250 pounds. I'm transgender. Um, it's a lot that goes with it. So when I see things like this happening, and I see people that look like me dying by police behind a badge, I'm very, very, very loud about it. And so I was down there and I was doing my thing, on the megaphone. I can't breathe, no justice, no peace. Like Black Lives Matter, right? And so then we heard this group, which was actually louder than me because I was the loudest one. So it took a whole group and they were marching down. And all of a sudden, they're like, yo, you're mad cool. Like, yo, you come with us. And I'm like, I don't know you, but you seem cool. You came with this group. I'm like, can I bring my mom with me? They're like, yeah, come on. Yo, we walk up into this building, and it must have been like a hotel where, I don't know, where everybody must have been staying. We go up this escalator, it's really quiet. Then we go up another escalator, and there you got Spike Lee, Trayvon Martin's mom, Trayvon Martin's dad, Trayvon Martin's brother, Eric Garner's mom, Eric Garner's dad, Mike Brown's mom, Mike Brown's dad. And I got my mom with me. I mean, it empowered me so much, and it brought me so much strength and so much hope in myself as an individual that one man can change the world. I look up to a lot of people, right? And I know Martin Luther King Jr., right? But also I want to put Michael Jackson out there, like looking at the man in the mirror and knowing that I can be heard, and that I was heard, and that I was seen. It really changed my life, and I'll never forget that moment.
Thanks for sharing that. Well, I guess this is a good time for me to stop and just say thank you to everybody for your activism, for all the work that you've done. Everybody here is working on slightly different issues, but you're all doing great work. So thank you. We all benefit from it. Venus, you want to?
Yeah, that sounds good. So there sometimes can be a difference between how we envision something happening, especially when we're kind of planning it, and how it actually happens. So just thinking back to your first protest or an earlier protest in your life, what was the biggest surprise, good or bad, when it actually became a reality? And maybe we'll go in the opposite order. So Royal, if we can maybe ask to begin with you.
Well, yeah, Royal, he, him, his. The first protest I ever organized didn't go as planned, right? Um,
Let us hear it, Royal.
where do I start, right? I know I tried to break it down, like, so I live in Pleasant Valley, New York, and I wanted to organize a protest in my town. I've been to a lot of different events with other people organizing, and I said, why not have one in my town, right? Represent. So I put it out in a month notice, right? And about 2 weeks before it starts to catch fire. And the other side, which I would call like MAGA supporters, GOP, um, Dutchess County Conservative Party, literally hosted an event the same day, an hour before mine, at the same location, and actually got some fire built up too. So we ended up basically having to figure out what we're going to do, because the death threats started to come in, right? We started to get emails, we started to get messages, we started to see Facebook posts, we started to get, phone calls from people who wanted to come and bring their kids. Can I bring my dogs? And I'm like, whoa, and then I'm like, wow, how many people, the event was posted on Facebook. We almost had like 500 people. And I'm like talking to the town, like, how many people do I at max capacity? Because I don't want to get a ticket, because we didn't have any permit regulations. Well, so there was like a big deal about that, me not having more people. With the death threats, I said, let me go. And so that was complicated, right? I talked to a lot of different people, and it was like, do I work with the cops or do I not work with the cops, right? Do I get their help or do I get my own help? And I said, let me do both. I got some peacekeepers, some front lines, and some marshals. And then I also worked with the Dutchess County Sheriff's Department, as well as the New York State Police Department. How we ended up getting surrounded by angry Dutchess County Conservative Party representatives, spat on, just beat up, basically, like, is way beyond me. But it happened. Even with all that security, with all that planning, with all that strategizing, with all the communication and transparency, communications failed. That's what the investigation was found. Communications, they blamed it on a failure of communications. That was my first protest that I've ever organized. Almost 1,000 people when you put on the people that I had versus the people that were counter protesting my event in a small town called Pleasant Valley. It was crazy.
Yeah, really incredible, because it sounds like you tried to take a very balanced approach. And then this thing just caught fire.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's very real. I think what you've described is very real.
And real quick, I wanted to add too, I wanted to make sure that we remained peaceful because I knew about the death threats. As I said, somebody I look up to and idolize, and my mentor, Martin Luther King Jr., no matter what, in the face of any violence, I'm a nonviolent practitioner. And I told the people that were coming, this is how I want it to go. This is the threats. This is the way it is, and this is what I ask of you all. And the people that joined me were peaceful in the face of violence, literally being attacked, broken noses, and nobody on the scene was arrested.
Yeah. Thanks, Royal. I think, I think unfortunately many of us can relate. Thank you for sharing that. Eileen, wondering if you have any tales to tell around some of your biggest kind of surprises, good or bad?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a hard story to follow. But probably the most surprising thing was several months after the one I mentioned, where we were going to a lot of PNC bank branches, we decided to go to the PNC annual shareholder meeting. We had been doing that for the last couple of years, and it was usually in Pittsburgh. And that particular year, they decided to move it to Tampa. And we're based in Philadelphia. But the funny thing was that there was a group of Quaker teenagers in Florida who had been writing and saying, like, we really want to get involved with you guys. And I was like, I don't know what to do with Quaker teenagers in Florida, but okay, I'll email you. And then they moved their shareholder meeting to Florida. So that was the good part of the story. We had all these young people who turned out, and they turned out their elders. And so we had like a little protest outside the shareholder meeting, but we had also arranged what are called proxy shares, where someone who is a shareholder will loan their share to a protester or somebody so that we can legally get in the meeting. And so we had lined up a bunch of people to do that, including some of the teenagers from Florida. We had like done the paperwork and all that kind of stuff. We knew we did not want to get arrested in Florida. They have pretty strict protest laws. It's illegal to hold up a sign in a meeting in Florida. And so we had planned to wear t-shirts because we couldn't find anywhere that was illegal, that said praying for PNC to act responsibly. And we wore them under our jackets, and we're going to take them off. And we had also planned to do prayer, stand up and pray in silence, because we thought it's not illegal to pray in Florida. And if they did arrest us, they would look so bad for arresting people for praying, right? I was especially nervous because this was after Trayvon Martin was killed, and I was the action lead, and my partner, who is the police liaison, is African American, and so I had like money hidden in my car. If they arrest Matthew, like get him out first, you know. But the surprise was that in the end, they didn't let anyone into the meeting except me. So I expected to be with a team of people, and I got in and I was totally alone. And so I had to figure out like what to do, whether to still stand up and do the prayer and everything by myself, which I felt like I have to. I'm the only one who got in. I have to do that. But you know, basically I tried to just calm myself down and sort of pay attention to what was happening and pick a moment that seemed to make sense. And as soon as I stood up, they shut the meeting down. But it really was because they were racing. They were so nervous about what we were going to do. They were racing through their agenda. And so it was sort of this beautiful thing. And then when it ended, I stood there, I continued in prayer until everybody was like pretty much leaving the room, except the security head who was standing right behind me the whole time. And then when I walked out, all the rest of the team, Matthew and the Quaker teenagers, are all like singing out in the lobby. And so then we all walked out singing to join the rest of the group outside.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure to be the one person kind of representing, and it sounds like you did it with a lot of grace.
Surprise! You never know what's going to happen. You really don't.
Wow. Roya, how about you?
You know, for me, the biggest surprise was how much people respond once you begin to take action, and how many helpers with similar views are out there. So this is a true story. You know, 2 weeks prior to our event in New Orleans, you know, we were visiting different cities. I was really concerned that we had no one supporting our organization there. Did not know anyone. We were so close to start our journey, so I was panicking. So I started to send a bunch of emails to various groups asking for help and posted on Facebook. And literally within hours, I had two amazing volunteers who I did not know call me and they said, "What do you need? Just tell me." Within hours, I put them together. And then within days, they had managed to orchestrate one of the most successful events on our long journey to the border. So, it's true that saying that ask and you shall receive. So the outpouring of support and help at every step of our journey was really astonishing and surprising.
Thanks, Roya. How about you, Zoe?
So, like I said, my first actions were while I was in high school, and they were with high school students. And as I'm sure some of you know, teenagers don't always follow direction, even if they want things to go well. So our original walkout was supposed to be for 2 class periods, and we ended up being out all day. And part of that was a little bit because a small group were very happy to be outside. It was like the middle of May. It was gorgeous out. I get it. But a part of it truly was no one wanted to go inside because it felt like a concession. Even though we had planned to only stay out for a few hours, everyone just really wanted to continue that solidarity. But once I started organizing within my community outside of high school and with all people of all ages, people from all backgrounds. While I do stuff through Sussex County Pride, we organize the only Pride events in our area, which are very, very important to me as a queer person. I do a lot of activism just on my own and with other local organizations like National Organization for Women chapters, other grassroots groups, League of Women Voters. And when we started getting counter protesters at events, for example, events defending DACA, things about what our local elected officials have said, Black Lives Matter events, honestly, anything we were going to be in our designated protest area for, we had white supremacists across the street. And when I say white supremacists, they were from a local organization, but they had ties to Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and dangerous white supremacy organizations within the United States. And I'll never forget, I don't even remember what the action was for, but we were on this square where all the action in my area happens, good or bad. And there's a gazebo, and it was in the winter, so it was dark out. And it was the first time we had ever had a counter protester, and we didn't know it was happening, who during a speech ran up the back of the square. So normally in the summer, the square it's the Newton Green, and it's a square that's surrounded by traffic. It's like one of those like weird roundabout things, but there's a park in the middle, and so normally we would give speeches from the gazebo and people would be in the park, but because it was winter, we were just kind of on the sidewalk on the other side of the gazebo. So during a speech, this individual ran up the hill in the dark and started shouting over one of our speakers, which was terrifying because it was a larger man yelling over a older, small woman. And ever since then, we have had issues of being doxxed, our locations being given out, our addresses being given out, genuinely feeling unsafe. And while we have kind of been able to work with local authorities and also have our own peacekeepers, if you will, like Royal was saying, have members from communities and people we trust on the lookout for trouble, not in the threatening way, but in the truly just making sure we're all safe. It's a lot to control people who are just truly just there to try and make a difference, who are making matters worse. An issue we have here in Sussex is because it is around this traffic, we get honks and middle fingers and very fun stuff. And one of the biggest challenges for us as organizers is to make sure we all stay on message and positive and say, have a good day, person in the car who wants me dead. I'm laughing, but it's horrible. But it truly, something I really did not expect when I started organizing is how much I would have to think about the other side, if you will, not in a way that we feel the need to appease people who disrespect our existence, but truly for our safety, have to know who is where and who is going to be across the street, and be in communication with local officials who probably agree with them purely for our safety. And it's never something you think of when you get into organizing and be like, huh, I wonder what my local white supremacists are going to think about me. But it truly has become an issue simply for our safety. And it honestly is a big deterrent, because people like do want to bring their kids and do want to bring people to protest just to set a really good example, but it's completely understandable that people don't want to, because they see what happens online in the days before and days after. So intimidation from other people is the biggest surprise, but I also feel the more people show up and say, no, you are not going to intimidate us, the easier it gets to continue the actions you want to be taking.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. One thing that we talk about a lot at Article 20 Network is the incredible disparity between, sort of the right to peaceful assembly versus the actual experience of protest and assembly, and how to really bridge that, so that safety is something that that we all can actually experience and realize as one of our inherent rights in doing this work. Yeah, and Dan, that's a good segue over to you.
Yeah, because we talk a lot about the international norms and international standards for what we say managing public assemblies. The role of the police and the authorities in international standards is to facilitate and assist a protest, right? To find out what a protest needs and to facilitate it. And many others have a different experience of the police. How would you describe your interactions with police? Now, some of you have touched on this already, so feel free to go into this in whatever way you'd like. And how would you describe your interactions with police before, during, and after your protest or protests? And if you've organized multiple protests, what types of communication with the authorities, if any, was most successful for you? Maybe I'll jump around a little this time to Roya.
I think you said Roya, right?
Roya, yeah.
Yes. So, my interaction with police has been limited. Where we were on our journey, we did interact with the police during our protest in Houston, and it was actually, they did a good job. It was adequate protection, very professional every step of the way. Although we had a positive experience. We were also a group of grannies, right? And I wonder what it would have been if the story was different, if we were like a young, diverse protesters. So in terms of the authorities and the communication, I would say that it's really important to do the research around rules and regulations about public demonstration, and be able to be armed with that information, and be very detailed in communication and be persistent around it.
Thanks. How about you, Zoe?
So I am also a 21-year-old white woman. So my experiences as an organizer are not as negative as they could be for many other organizers within the United States and within my area. Personally, I try to be very by the book when I organize an action. I always get a permit, if I can, well in advance. And usually that means law enforcement contacts. If they're going to contact me at all, it will be the day before. And the majority of my interactions have been with the same township police department that monitors that section of park, and on the day of. And it truly, for me personally, has ranged officer to officer. Some members of that police department have been incredibly helpful, courteous, professional, and other members I've had to argue with that they made the counter-protesting section the only handicapped parking spot in that area. So it truly is an inconsistency within certain departments. And during our Black Lives Matter organizing, which and I lent a hand to. I was not the forefront, I was not the key person for those events, because again, I am a tiny white lady. But I, myself and a few other women were very specific on us being the ones to interact with local police, and so that people of color who were organizing did not have to, partially because they had other things to do, but also because it was a Black Lives Matter protest, and the death of George Floyd and Sandra Bland and others were so incredibly real, and well, real, but also still it hit home. And like Royal was saying before, like when you see someone who looks like you being murdered by police, it's a badge. So while my personal interactions have been mostly positive, it is not the same for all members of my community.
Right, thank you. So Royal, you told us about how you reached out to the Sheriff's Department and how they were there. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the communication that you had with the Sheriff's Department before and after, and maybe even during, if you had any.
So before, you know, I was in good contact. You know, they were very good with being open and honest and transparent. Before, I never had any problems with the police, right? Never had any bad run-ins. I can't say that I've been unjustly treated personally by the police until then. Um, and then once the event happened, all the transparency and the clarity and the communication just started to dissolve. Um, you know, first it was, you know, we're there. Then it was like after when it was when it happened, um, you know, they were just so scrambling to try to get their people, and I'm scrambling. Well, actually, they were scrambling trying to protect us from the crazies, right? The Dutchess County Conservative Party, because they followed us to our safe haven, and they had to have a riot gear stop them. So they were busy doing that, and I was busy trying to gather my people, and like, so we didn't really talk a lot during. There was a lot of yelling. Like I told them, like, you need to do a better job, and you know, these people need to leave, and so we can get out safely. Then afterwards, we talked a little bit more, and I had the ACLU on the phone with me. A lot of those conversations to guide me, you know, legally. And then after that, we had about two more, and then they had their case kind of opening. The Dutchess County legislators wanted to kind of hold them accountable and have some understanding, have a hearing on what happened, what their view was, and what their perception was, because county legislators were in attendance that day. Um, so after that, and their investigation came out, like I said, and they found what they found, that was it. You know, no apologies, no, you know, nothing, no calls, how y'all doing, you know, nothing, you know.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Eileen?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Just in terms of practice, we typically target corporations. So we're not going to a park or a public place, we're going to private property. So we don't ask for permits. And even if we're gonna like march down the street on our way to the corporation, we don't ask for permits. We do call the police that morning if we're planning civil disobedience. Our experience is that the corporation reads our website enough that they knew we were coming anyway. The police are usually waiting for us. But for a non-civil disobedience action, we don't call them. Our relationship is kind of strange for a number of reasons, I think. As people have mentioned, race absolutely plays a role in this, right? We're a predominantly white group. And so that does make an impact on how the police perceive us. We also have a lot of older folks, predominantly middle class. I think all of those things do make a difference. We also have Quaker in our name, in a city that was founded by Quakers. And we have organized probably at least 100 actions in Philadelphia. So the Philadelphia police know us. They know we're nonviolent. They know what kinds of things we do. And we actually like literally know them. So that is different than what a lot of groups experience. A few other things I'll point out, though, as people are organizing to be aware of, the jurisdiction you're in really, really makes a difference. In Philadelphia, we have a civil affairs department that was trained in how to deal with protesters. Um, uh, I know people in Appalachia who have protested the coal companies and were treated very, very roughly, very, very differently, even though they were also predominantly white. So it partly has to do with the location that you're in, but it also has to do with who and what you're protesting, I think. So for example, if you're, a coal company, an oil company, a pipeline that's company that's building an oil or gas pipeline, they do not care about their public image. They care about suppressing dissent. And so, thinking about activists I know around the country, the people who have taken on those fights, like interrupting a pipeline being built or something like that, are in general treated much more roughly than in our situation. We have intentionally chosen corporations that do care about their public image because we think they're easier to move, that there's a vulnerability there. So we picked a bank that was paying for this awful practice, but the bank has a lot of other customers and they really care what people think about them. And it is very clear to me that in those situations in the corporate lobby, the police are taking their orders from the company. Like we've actually watched them get on the phone with the company and say, what do you want us to do with these people? And I think it's part of the reason that we've always been treated very gently and courteously is we're dealing with companies that don't want the bad press. And if we were in Appalachia stopping coal mining, it would be a different story. So all of those things go into what you can expect from police. And if you're organizing in a new area, I would just say ask around, talk to people to find out what their experience has been. It doesn't guarantee you'll have the same experience, but it ranges so widely. It's good to do your homework.
It's very true. And, in the, since 2016, right after Trump was elected president, there's been a raft of anti-protest laws all over the United States. A lot of them are targeting what they call critical infrastructure protests, protests at pipelines and such. But some of them have been really awful, and they've been significant enough that they've really changed the landscape of protest in many states. Right now, as we speak, there's in Oklahoma, they just passed a law in their state house that indemnifies motorists, indemnifies drivers if they strike protesters with their car. And the saddest thing, and I can tell you this from the Article 20 network, is this is not the first time we've seen this law. We've seen it many times being proposed in the United States. So you're absolutely right. Wherever you are really has a lot to say about where you protest. And further, every community, every municipality and county has different laws about obtaining a permit, what insurance requirements are. So I like to hear the advice. While I disagree with the permitting process, I do like to hear the advice that you should check in and hear about your permit. Obviously, permits are not available for private property. All right, so we have a couple questions that are for each of you. One question for each of you. And I think maybe I'll just turn that over to Venus to ask the next one. This might be a good chance, by the way. We're starting to see some questions in the Q&A. So if there's anyone in the audience who has any questions, go ahead and share them in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If your question is for a specific panelist, just be sure to let us know and we'll get to your question very soon.
Yeah, so one question that we had is for you, Roya, just as we're talking about kind of various cities and what, permits and protesting and such looks like in those cities. That would be good to ask this question next. So Granny's Respond was a week-long caravan with immigration protests in different cities every day. what was the same and what was different at each stop? And why do you think those similarities and differences were there?
Yeah, we were on a 2,000-mile journey to the border to protest the inhumane treatment of the immigrants and children by our government. And during our trip, we stopped at key locations along the way to hold rallies, events, offer a message of compassion while, demanding the reunification and release of the detained kids and the families. So what was the same was that every stop, we were really welcomed by a cadre of really passionate volunteers who cared deeply about the cause, which was really inspiring. They offered us food, housing, anything that we would need. One example is Eated Bell, a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor and a lifeline activist who helped us organize our event in Pittsburgh. And what was similar was also our ability to raise awareness at each stop, even though our event was, they were planned differently. What was different was, I would say the format of our events were different in each city. In Pennsylvania, we held a vigil right outside of the Brooks Family Residential Center. By the way, I'm happy to report that they just released the last family from there recently. In Pittsburgh, we invited to a church to share our stories. In Louisville, we had a speak out. We had a candlelight vigil in Texas. So, I think the differences shaped somehow by the local issues related to our cause, influenced also by some of the cultural practices of that area. For example, when we were in Texas near one of the detention center, interestingly, even though we were being picked up by national media, the local media refused to air our story. And we think it's because that the economy in that area and the employment was run by the detention center. And they did not want any local sort of bad press around that. And then talking about culture, in New Orleans, we demonstrated at the First Grace United Methodist Church. And after the rally, we ended with a jazz funeral and a second line, which is a tradition in that city. And we did that to sort of symbolize burying all the injustices, including the one that we were protesting.
It's really fascinating. The cultural, the regional and cultural differences to protest. It really is something. Zoe, you are organizing in a community where there's not a lot of awareness or support for your message, as you said, and there's quite a few detractors of your message that come out as well. What challenges do you face building a team and a movement in that environment?
Awareness, honestly, social media has been the most annoying and helpful tool for our cause. Just because I have been able to meet so many wonderful, wonderful people, mostly women, who have both helped raise awareness about issues in our area, because some people don't know about our elected officials who pose with Confederate flags and talk about abortion in county commissioners meetings, just because the information isn't readily available, and it is frankly purposefully not readily available from our county administrators and local state officials. So being able to utilize the internet and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff to communicate with people on other sides of our area physically has been really, really powerful. And I'm very grateful for the people I have met who've been able to help with both the LGBT events, our actions, but also like to go to local officials meetings and call out hypocrisy or ask for resolutions or actions that will both help affect change in our community and just be a little more symbolic. And just getting information out has been both the biggest challenge and the biggest payoff, because there are people I never would have met who have come out like because of things they saw on social media, and have now been like the biggest fighters against injustice in our area and to try and hold our officials accountable. I mean, Facebook groups have been a super great tool. Group chats, I love the app Signal. Everyone should have it. But it's very strange organizing on a local level with your neighbors because you find out they went to high school with your dad, and it's like, oh, weird. But it's also just really, really rewarding because when you organize on such like a microcosm of national politics on a local level, you see so much payoff, even if it isn't as quickly, but it just feels like it's very resounding and like you can feel it personally. Sorry, I saw Royal's lights go out and I was very concerned on his behalf. But no, the internet has been the greatest tool, and also is super annoying because you can't control who sees it, and that's how we get white supremacists across the street. But you know what? You win some, you lose some.
Maybe while Royal's getting the lights back on, Venus, you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Eileen, you started to tell us a little bit about some of the strategic sort of trainings that you've done. We know that you teach folks about how to identify a kind of a target of their protest as well as the target's vulnerabilities. And we were wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about that type of strategic thinking, maybe through the lens of some of the campaigns that you've worked on.
Yeah, you bet. So one of the tools we use is called the Pillars of Power, and it's a way of understanding that any powerful institution, whether it's the police or the fossil fuel company or whoever is doing something that you're trying to change, there are other institutions cooperating with them and enforcing their power. And sometimes it's easier to change those people than to change the people who you might think of first. So, for example, as I mentioned, coal companies really don't care what anybody thinks. If you're blowing up mountains to get coal, you do not care. But they need money. It's a very finance intensive way to coal mine, and the banks do care what the public thinks about them. So it's indirect, but it's actually more effective. And this has become a major strategy in the climate movement to target the financing of fossil fuels. Another example that I love is a group called the Coalition of Immokalee Workers that represents tomato pickers. Many of them immigrant, people of color, who we don't think have like a lot of power in terms of labor negotiations with big companies, maybe would be the stereotype. But they did an amazing job of organizing. They were working in really horrible conditions and couldn't get the tomato growers to pay them better and give them breaks and whatnot. And the tomato growers said, we can't pay you more, or else the big fast food chains won't buy our tomatoes. They'll buy from somebody cheaper. And so the coalition decided to go after those chains because everybody knows Wendy's, everybody knows Taco Bell. Those companies do care about their public image, and they have very successfully gotten over a dozen big corporations, Walmart, Whole Foods, to sign a pledge saying we will only buy tomatoes from companies that are paying their workers, treating them fairly, and doing things like that. And that has really transformed the industry by being smart about who you're pressuring and picking people who have both power and vulnerability to public pressure.
Thank you for that. Royal, I'm going to bring us back to the the topic that we've been speaking with you about the most tonight. So you put a lot of work into your peacekeeping operation for your protests because you knew where you were. Could you talk a little bit about, and I think you had National Lawyers Guild there too, right? Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about how you prepared the peacekeepers? And then, one thing I would just love to know is, because you were so well prepared and things did go south, what was an early indicator for you when you were looking around and keeping your eyes on things? What was a sign that things maybe weren't right?
I smile only because I can live to tell the tale, and we all walked away, right? Because wow, loaded questions, right? Like so, I'll start with when I knew it was gonna go back. So I feel like that's really easy to remember. I remember, um, of course, like the first moment I was like, this might not go too good was when I walked up from the dugout and I saw that they were right across the street before we could even start to march. Like they were already there, lined up on all sides of the street. And automatically, that was not supposed to happen, right? They were not supposed to be able to be on the sides of us or in the road or like behind us, like it mixed between us. We're supposed to have at least 6 feet of distance because of COVID. They had no masks. Then, like, I knew it was going to go bad again when the four-wheelers were riding through the crowd instead of stopping them and dispersing them. Like we were marching into their crowd and the four-wheelers just didn't even care. It was intense. One of the things that I remember distinctly when I was like, what's going wrong? Because I told peacekeepers and frontliners to have a whistle. And if you happen to get pushed or touched, if something happens, blow the whistle. That was our code. And we had discussed that with the sheriffs. Well, I don't know how the other side happened to find out, the Dutchess County Conservative Party, but somebody was blowing a whistle on their side. And that also had set me off too. But when I would look, nothing was there. Like I said, there was almost like 1,000 people. And this was my first protest, about 500 on my side and 500 on their side. So there was a lot of indications when things were going bad because they went bad from the start almost. It was pretty bad. What was the other question?
Well, just a little more about how you prepared, because you had a training and you did a lot.
Right. I will say that although my name and my face is out there as the lead organizer, it took a team. I know Roya touched on it. It took a community. It took a lot of support from a lot of people. And I really want to thank everybody that did support me through this. And also the person, Kevin Halcott was my co-organizer at the moment. And he really did focus on the training um, as he was a very much more experienced organizer than I was at the time and still am. He's really out there a lot, and he helped me understand his vision to correlate with my vision, which was more of a nonviolence approach. So he was just basically kind of like I said, we were telling the peacekeepers and frontliners and marshals, use the walkie-talkies. People donated enough money so we could get walkie-talkies. Use the whistles, get the vests. This is what you do if somebody happens to start getting into altercation. Just use your body as a human shield, because that's what it came down to, right? It came down to us locking arms and surrounding our people so that the other Dutchess County Conservative Party could not continuously attack us. We had to lock arms. So things went like we had plans, right? We had like so many plans and we exhausted every one of them. If it wasn't for the people that was there, like the New York Lawyers Guild and the ACLU and just the peacekeepers and just you know helping us get through safety, it was very chaotic.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. It strikes me that tonight we've really kind of run the gamut so far of talking about kind of the notes of inspiration in the work that all of you have done and have felt along the way, to some of the very real experiences that that we've had that have been really difficult. And we have a question in the Q&A that I think would be powerful to talk about, and we'll sort of pose it to anyone on our panel who wants to answer. So the question is, how do you keep the energy and commitment to protest and fight for these issues when you feel like those in power continue to ignore or abandon you?
It's really funny to watch us all unmute and mute it. So I was like,
It looks like maybe Zoe and Eileen had answers. Am I right? Am I reading the the muting right? Okay. Zoe.
Eileen, you can go ahead.
Well, I think there's two things that help people stick around. One is a sense that their work is making a difference, and another is community. And so building relationship, having snacks at the meeting back, when we get to meet in person again, developing relationships with people really, really makes a difference on people's willingness to do work, stay for the long haul, and also take risk together if you are doing the kind of protests that are risky. The thing about making a difference is harder because sometimes it takes a while. So I've just gotten more explicit about that, especially after Trump's election. I noticed that new people would come and say, what is this action going to do? Which I hadn't really heard people ask that quite so plainly before. And I appreciated it. And my answer was nothing. By itself, this action will do nothing. But we did 125 actions against a $4 billion a year company, and that won a campaign. So my metaphor is that activism is like exercise. You go to the gym once and you're really not going to lose 20 pounds. But if you show up again and again and again, it absolutely does make a difference. And I think it's really important to constantly remind people that it is a marathon and not a sprint. And that little things like even getting locked out of the bank, we would say, okay, this is a mini victory. It shows that they're, bothered by what we're doing, or finding that encouragement where you can, and continuing to frame why you're doing what you're doing and why the long-term strategy makes sense, I think really helps people.
Something I wanted to touch on with that question specifically is, it also, for me, it also ties into mental health, because my advocacy has also been it's been important for me as an activist to also speak my truth and be authentic in my leadership and talk about experiences I've had in a way to make it okay for other people to talk about it. So mental health and being able to take a break is very, very important to me, because activism burnout is very, very real, and is important for people to recognize. I need to sit this one out. I will be at the next one, because it does. I mean, I feel like I've been very doom and gloom, but protesting is one of my favorite things to do. It is very meaningful and powerful change. It does take a lot out of you to deal with negativity and also put it together. It is a lot to do, especially because we're all doing it out of the kindness of our hearts. We do it for free. Donate to Action Article 20 Network. But it is important to recognize within yourself, I need to take a break. I need to sit this action or this protest out. I will go to the next one, because you can't affect change if you are too tired to do it. And while I agree with everything Eileen said, because that long-term goal is very, very real, we need all of us in it to get there. And if it means somebody needs to have a sick day, if you will, it'll get us all there in the future. So I think it is very important to listen to your body and yourself to be like, okay, next time.
That's an awesome point, Zoe. Thank you. And Dan, sorry to, I saw your mouth moving, but I think you might be muted.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute while I had the Q&A open, but we have some really good questions here. So I'm going to jump around a bit, because there's a topic here that I would like to make sure that we get to. Addison is asking, what about civil disobedience training, which is a great question. To first point out, just for the audience, the when we talk about civil disobedience, it's a little different than when we're talking about public gatherings or public assemblies. A civil disobedience is an intentional violation of the law to prove a point or make a point. Whereas a peaceful assembly, a public assembly, is just a gathering of people. Oftentimes the two go hand in hand, and it's pretty hard to have a civil disobedience without a gathering of people. But let's see, is there anybody here who has led or been to a civil disobedience training that would like to speak on that experience? Yeah, Roya, you've been to one too. Yeah, Eileen, you want to talk about what it's like to lead one, and maybe Roya can talk about what it's like to attend one, what you learned?
Yeah, we absolutely require that someone attends our training before they take that kind of action with us. That's not true for other actions that we lead, but it's usually several hours. It involves some relationship building, some paying attention to our body. I love that you talked about that, Zoe, because civil disobedience is scary. Like, even if you're having a decent experience of the police, it's still scary to be put in handcuffs and feel the power of the state. And so helping people get grounded, giving them some tools for managing their fear. We do role plays of what the action is going to be. And because of the fact that it's always surprising, we'll might run a couple of different scenarios, even if what happens in real life is different. So we didn't run the scenario of me being alone in the shareholder meeting, but the role plays were still helpful to me staying grounded in that moment. And then we also do a legal briefing where we talk about what the risk is, what we think might happen, what we don't know, and try and give people as much information about that as we can. Then we also have some things for people to sign the morning of, make sure everybody has left contact information, left their valuables with someone. We try to be very organized. And one thing we do that I think not everyone does, which I recommend, is giving people follow-up emotional support. So if people do civil disobedience, we try to call them the next day and say, hey, how was that? How are you feeling? I mean, we have a group debrief too, but recognizing that it is a big experience for a lot of people and wanting them to feel empowered by it and have a chance to process their feelings.
Thanks.
Dan, I guess the only thing that I would add to that is that, yeah, we for in preparation for our trip, we also had training around civil disobedience. And one thing that stuck with me is how much that training was important, how much preparation is involved, like Eileen was just talking about. And so it's really critical to be thoughtful about it prior to engaging in that experience.
I just also want to paint a picture for the audience of a group of grandmothers attending civil disobedience in a room full of rocking chairs, being taught how to saw a PVC pipe and stuff. So it was pretty beautiful. Venus, any questions from the Q&A that you want to bring up?
Yeah, I think there's a good question around how you go from actually feeling like I care about this issue, I'm passionate about it, to okay, we're actually protesting now. And there's a question related to that, that is just, what was the turning point for you? So wondering if any of you can speak to how you actually went from I care about this to doing the work.
My name is Royal. I go by he, him, his. Like I kind of touched on it, Trayvon Martin. But as a person of color, as a Black person, I mean, just being born, right? Being born into it. Once I started to recognize and realize and firsthand deal with racism, bigotry, sexism, all kinds of things, right? Um, I I knew, and it's tough, right? I tell people it's tough being Black, and I tell people it's tough, being Black and doing this work and putting yourself out there. right? Literally, once again, you're standing up for yourself, and we know how that goes for people because we've seen it in history that look like me. So it's scary, right? But I want to say that it takes a lot of courage. It's brave, right? You do it, you go out there, and you can make history. You can inspire other people to do things that they never thought they could do, right? Because they see you and you look just like them, and you're doing it. So it's like motivation, and it's really nice when the community uplifts you and people see you, and all those negative people kind of dwindle out of your life, and you find a new family that supports you and gets you. Um, so yeah.
Um, I like to add to that. I really relate to what you just said, Royal. I think in my case, also, I could relate to the issue because, I was seeing images of kids being in cages. And I remember distinctly one day when my granddaughter, who was actually watching the TV with me, turned to me crying and said, "Is this going to happen to me? Is this going to happen to my dad? Is this happening to my mom?" And to me, that was the turning moment that, you know what, this could be happening to my family. And so that's really sparked something in me to take more action and just caring about the issue and actually doing something about it. And I recall Brian Stevens' guidance and advice is, if you really care about something, if you want to make a change, you got to get close to it. That proximity, right, is so important. And so I would say that, just making a connection of some sort, it makes it really powerful.
Yeah. I think we probably have time for one more question. So we have a question. How would you encourage people? Maybe we can all touch on this one. If maybe we can go around and everybody answer this one, because this is important. How would you encourage people who want to protest but are too fearful to take that first step in joining one? Royal, what would you say?
I'm sorry, Roy or Roy.
Royal, sorry.
By the way, Roy,
We'll
like
never go with the two of you for a panel.
that's awesome, right? That's great. I love your name. I love what you've been saying. This is awesome. Like, I got the kids on my shirt. That's my sign. But I think I touched on it a little bit, right? You know, so I tell people all the time, there's always a risk, right? Um, when you go outside as a Black person, I've always felt that risk. I've come very comfortable with that risk. So if I can do it, anybody on this panel could do it, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, come on now. Like, if I'm gonna go be, and go out there with the way I look and still stand up for people like me, knowing what kind of consequences come towards me, it's like y'all job to stand in front of me and protect me while I stand up for myself, because y'all know what it is, right? Y'all get it. So I say that, and also to say, like I said, you can seriously inspire somebody. Like, the letters I get, the messages I get, the support I get, it's unmatched. I never thought in my wildest dreams that I'd be sitting here talking to y'all with this panel and like this, like, never. So it's great. You can achieve great things.
Thank you. Who else has inspiring words for people who are trying to find their legs? No inspiration. That's
I would say, baby steps, right? And I think just trying a few things, and you would get, you know, beaten by the bug, and this experiences are so transformational that once you get involved, it's hard to stop. So I would say just try it out and just get out there, from the smallest thing, and then you'll feel it. And once you feel it, then it's hard to stop.
Thanks. Anybody else want to? Eileen?
I've been thinking a lot about how we talk about risk and feeling like we just need to get more honest and explicit about that. I really appreciated what you said, Royal. I find a lot of the people with the biggest fears are people with the least to fear sometimes. And to just get really explicit, like, what are you afraid of? You know, what do you think is going to happen? And do you have any evidence for that fear? You know, um, I also think it's really important to give people tools to manage their fear. So, like in civil disobedience training or in my courses, we talk about singing. How many movements have used singing as a way to kind of empower people? You know, it could be prayer, it could be everybody wearing the same color shirt. Like there's lots of little things you can do to help build the courage of the group. And I think once people are invited in, as Roya said, like, you know, I wouldn't put a brand new person in the scariest role, but you know, there's ways to kind of help bring people along in that. But I do think the biggest hurdle is getting somebody to come for the first time.
Anything you want to add, Zoe?
Yeah, it is the biggest leap that you can take to start getting involved with local activism and social justice work, but it is so gratifying to do so. You can see the impact you're making. Even you don't even have to organize anything. To go to a local event, a national event, something as big as a local activist organizing, or something on the scale of like the Fridays for Our Future or the Women's March, something on an international scale. You may not even realize it, but you are inspiring those around you to also take action, to also speak up, to also make a difference. And let's say it's the pandemic, you don't want to be around people and do a protest. Donate to organizations that are facilitating this work. Donate to the protests that need water for the protesters or need walkie-talkies. Like, even if your action is not physically protesting, there are so many ways to help this movement. And when you say in a public way, whether it be posting that you were at a protest on social media or you were seen there, you are sending a message to your friends and loved ones and the people in your community who look up to you or who are your peers. It is the biggest message you can send and inspire others to do the same thing. And it is, anything new you do is scary. Anything new you do is a risk. Yeah. And it is the best one you can take because it pays off.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the risk tonight, not to dissuade people, but just to be real, right? Most protests are peaceful and most protests end peacefully. But you want to talk about what are the inherent risks in this, whether it be the policing of the protest or the counter protest. I'm going to try and prop up one question, maybe for one person, because we have a minute or so left. And it's from Goran in Canada. And Goran's asking about, you know, who you reach out to beforehand, public attorney, lobbying group. But I think the kernel of the question is the legal side of things. What kind of legal preparation do you make, if any, before you have a protest? Do you have somebody in the wings? Do you call them afterwards? Does anybody have an experience with this that they'd like to share? Or an insight that they'd like to share?
You know, I'll go first real quick, right? Just because like this is my thing, right? After that happened, I think that the more people that know, the better. I feel like blindsiding, especially during the climate that we had last year specifically, right? People didn't really like that. Just letting people know, you know, because you got ambulances, fire trucks, people trying to get to work, you know, and I know you feel like, well, I want to inconvenience people, but like, you don't want to angry people too much either, though. You kind of want to get them to join you, right? You want to make them want to be a part of. So I suggest the more people that know, the better. In my experience, that's what works. And I mean, from the top to the bottom, local legislation, all the way up to the attorney general.
Does anybody else want to touch on this question?
I think it depends on what you're doing. I mean, for us, we wouldn't call a lawyer unless we were planning to do civil disobedience, in which case we would have legal help lined up. We also, there's a group in Philly called Up Against the Law Collective that does legal observation. The thing about disparities of treatment has come up, and sometimes our white members feel a little guilty that the police are so nice to us. And Up Against the Law said that's actually really helpful. We would like to come observe and take notes so that if they treat the next group differently, we can point out that disparity. So it's actually helpful for you to have legal observers, even if you don't think that you need them. Um, for another kind of action, we wouldn't necessarily line up that kind of support ahead of time.
Sure.
I would add, Dan, in our trip, because we were going across multiple states and we weren't sure what will happen, we actually had Lawyers Mom of America who had offered their support to us. They had identified ahead of time for us attorneys at every state that we could call if we got into trouble or if we needed help or any guidance, that we could call them. So that was a level of preparation that we had done ahead of our trip.
Great. Lots of different perspectives. Good. Okay, so tonight we've been talking about the personal experience of organizing a protest, what to look out for, what, you know, how it feels and those kinds of things. But Article 20 Network, as we mentioned earlier on, is also sharing real concrete information about what it takes to organize a protest. Maybe we could pull the guide up one more time for the public. So what we're trying to do here between the guide and this panel is to share everything that you might experience with protests. So while we're not talking about some of the all the nuts and bolts of organizing a protest, please feel free to download the guide from the Article 20 Network website. We touch on everything from, you know, how to get the word out about your protest, how to pick up after yourself, you know, a lot of different aspects, getting media attention. And then we also talk about, as I said before, some of the kinds of things that you might want to, you know, push for as you gain more experience, characteristics of successful protests, spontaneity. We've touched on civil disobedience and disruption. So there's a lot to learn. You know, but we hope that tonight you also gained a little insight into kind of what it means to be a human who's organizing a protest and not just following 10 helpful tips. So I just want to end tonight with expression of gratitude for our panelists. Thank you again for everything that you do. Thank you for fighting for the causes that you're fighting for. You're all amazing, and I learned a lot from you tonight, and I hope that our audience did as well. Just a few things here. So if you have follow-up questions or something comes to mind for you after the panel, I'm talking to the audience, you can visit Article 20 Network's website and go to our contact form and just shoot us a note. And maybe we can try to funnel that question to one of the panelists or answer it ourselves. We'd be glad to help. And then we want to also just say one more time, sorry, it's just part of what we do, but you know, Article 20 Network, we believe that all of the information that we share should not be behind firewalls and should be free to the public. But the creation of these things does have costs. So we'd love it if you could be so kind to visit our website and leave us a donation. The link is in the chat. And then once again, thank you, everybody. We will follow up this, everybody who attended and everybody who got a ticket tonight. We'll share a recording of the video in case you had to leave early or come in late. And we'll also share some links to the work that all these folks are doing. Royal, Eileen, Roya, Zoe are all activists. And if you're interested in learning more about what they're doing or getting involved with their work, we'll share that information with you. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Royal, Eileen, Roya, Zoe. It was a really lovely conversation tonight. Thank you so much. And let me just say, just make sure that I'm not missing anything before we sign off. Nope. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Thank you, everybody who joined tonight. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.